visiting, so you aren't allowed to say anything that's company confidential with Steve around. Anyhow, I figured I'd tell you some about that. I don't know if this is necessarily a sales pitch to learn how to challenge square dance, but you might have a little bit of a understanding about what I do. And hopefully by the end of the talk, you'll certainly know how to do a random triple wave swing trip. Yeah, that's what the SQ board in the computer really does. I wanted to distinguish between the two different types of square dancing, which might be the stuff you learned in elementary school and the stuff that I do, but maybe a better way of saying it is what people call Eastern, traditional, or New England style square dancing. And there's also modern or Western style square dancing. And both types of square dancing are pretty popular. They're both done in the New England area and all throughout the company and the world for that matter. But there's some differences. It's kind of like the difference between cross-country skiing and downhill skiing. It's not that one's better than the other. They're just kind of different forms of close to the same thing. As the slide says, most of the Eastern style stuff, the emphasis is on music, dancing, having a good social time. The caller typically teaches a dance, and then once the people are good at doing it, it just repeats over and over, and they do it for some number of times. The caller's more of a prompter, sometimes actually gets down and joins in the square, and gets back up and kind of tells the band when to stop and ends the thing. The Concord Girl Scout House in this area is a place where there's a lot of traditional dancing. And that, I don't see Dan Weinreb, and I don't know who else from here are people who do that kind of stuff. Oh, Charlie Hornig, right. None of them are here. Well, and then there's the other kind, which I'm interested in, and the modern or Western style square dancing uses recorded music, and it's something that I think makes it exciting is it uses extemporaneous choreography. The dancer doesn't know what calls are coming next, so you have a kind of a split second to react to whatever you hear, and then start moving or continue moving because you're ending the last call as you blend into the next call. And the caller's making it up off the top of his head, or when he wants to make it more complicated than that, he writes it down beforehand. And everything's always different. So I was attracted to square dancing just because it wasn't like ballroom dancing or anything else where you had to invent stuff yourself. You could just do whatever the guy said to do, and it was pretty easy to do that, I thought. And then I got into calling, and well, now I have to invent stuff again. One of the other things about modern Western-style square dancing is there's a large number of calls, and it takes a long time to learn them. So if you went to MIT on Tuesday nights to learn how to square dance, it'd take like 12 weeks or 14 weeks. And if you tried to learn how to square dance in the outside world, they'd probably teach you the same number of stuff in 40 weeks. Whereas in Eastern style, you can go there on the first night, and you'll be a little rough and ragged at it, but you'll learn how to do it. So just so you understand all this stuff, here's a bunch of the terms. When you go to a dance, you dance for about 2.5 to 3 hours, and that's broken up into tips where you stand up and dance and sit down. And each tip's about 10 to 12 minutes long, and you get through 6 to 12 sequences. The sequences where you start from a squared set, and you move around doing whatever the caller says, and you get back to your corner, usually for an Allemande left or something, and that's your reward that, gee, I did this thing right, and it kind of resolves, so you know that something's happening. Each sequence contains a bunch of calls, and a call, there's not much to say. It's a bunch of words. It's a complete command. It may have several parts to it, which I'll talk about later, and each call takes some number of beats of music, and the idea is you take one step for every beat of music. I have a couple of videotapes. You'll see people doing that. Now, square dance lessons number 1 and 2, just so you have the same terminology I do. This is a squared set. I also call in addition to dancing, so I think of looking down at a square like this, and couple 1 is the couple I'm looking at, or they're the ones with their backs to the caller, and then going around in that direction. Here's couple 2, man, lady, 3, and 4. And there's a couple other things. The couples are numbered, or you can say heads. Heads happen to be couple 1 and 3 always, and the sides of the people who aren't the heads. And everyone has a partner. Man number 1's partner is lady number 1. And throughout the dance, it'll change, but like at the end of every sequence, he gets back to the same lady, you hope, if the caller does his job right. And finally, there's a corner, which is kind of around the corner of the square. So number 1 man's corner is number 4 lady. I think I said enough on that one. And what I want to do is teach you how to do one call. And once you know how to do that call, then we'll do a lot of stuff with it. And the call is called swing through. It's something that's taught in the first couple of weeks of lessons. It starts from an ocean wave. Here's a picture of an ocean wave. This is a person facing north and south and north and south. So these people would have right hands held with each other, and the centers would have left hands, and these people would have right hands. And the call can also start from facing couples, which looks like this. And the definition says, if necessary, step to a wave. So if the guy had you there when he said swing through, you have to step forward and grab right hands with somebody in front of you. And that gets you to the ocean wave. Then it says, those who can, arm turn half by the right. Well, if we were up here, it would be everyone has someone adjacent to them. They can turn half by the right. And those who can, arm turn half by the left. That'd just be the people who are left in the centers. And then it ends back in an ocean wave. So that's a typical call, one of the ones you'd learn. For those of you who didn't catch that, there's a picture, right? People trade, and then the centers trade. If you happen to, this is, I call it right-hand wave, because these people are holding right hands and these people are holding right hands. If you happen to have everyone turn around 180 degrees, so you had a left-hand wave, then the action would start in the middle, and that kind of tricks people, because what you do is you make sure that 90% of what they do is swing throughs from right-hand wave, and then 10% of the time you say swing through when they're in a left-hand wave, and they have to think and go. Right, it's always by the right hand. And there are very few calls like this that are always by the right hand, but I picked on one for today just to make it a little more interesting. Any questions so far? Following all this? Okay. Here's a typical sequence, something like heads left and right through, and wheel fan through, swing through, men run, couples circulate, wheel and deal, past the center, square through three, and then if you're lucky, a la man left. Now, I'm not going to teach you how to do all those calls, but it does have that swing through in there. And I think I'll push these little dancers through just so you can see what would happen here. So, pardon? Yeah, boy, if only we had something. Okay, so there's a nice squared up set. And you want something like heads left and right through. So these are the heads. They're going to go in the middle, and they're going to do this left and right through call. And they're a little too wide for that. But anyhow, they managed to pull by and turn. So here's where they would be. Wheel fan through says for this person to go like that and that one to go like that. And this man here has to go over, trade with this other man, and come back out this way. So if you watch the dancers, they'd really kind of come in around the middle and then come back out. So there we go. Swing through. Well, we're in facing couples. We have to follow the rule. We have to step up to right hands. So now we have these two right-hand waves, and even though the call swing through takes 4 people, if you have 2 groups of 4, each group does it independently. So everyone turns half by the right, and then the centers have to trade by the left, and that should take care of swing through. Men run. Well, the men are in the middle. They run around the person adjacent to them. Does that. Couples circulate. So each pair of people acting as a unit move forward 1 position in the square. So there we are there. Wheel and deal. That's done from this line and this line. It says these guys are going to come around, again, kind of working as a couple like that. Pass the center, pass straight through, passing right shoulders, because that's what you do. And then the outsides automatically have to trade with each other to get back so they're looking in. And square through 3, center's right hand pull by, quarter in, left hand pull by, quarter in, right hand pull by. And sure enough, one man's facing his corner, one lady, his partner's right behind him. These people have partners, these people have partners, these people have partners. So you can call a la man left, right and left grand, promenade home, something like that. So there's the sequence. Questions? It worked. Now I want to talk a little bit more about the parts of a call. So far, everything I've talked about in that sequence, except for the left and right through, is really pretty elementary stuff. And that's what a lot of square dancing is about. But there's a section of square dancing called challenge square dancing because it's challenging, not because you compete with other people or get trophies or anything. whose sole intent is to make this as complicated as you can and still be able to do it in real time. And the better you get at it, the more complicated you can get. So whenever you've mastered something, you add more complication to it, and you keep doing that until you find people who, there's no higher to go, kind of, or people say that's enough. And this will get into a little bit of that. So a little bit more about calls. For example, if we're doing the call once removed heads kickoff, there's a whole lot more going on there. That you don't learn that as a big group of words. You have to divide it into pieces. Typically, you're standing in some spots in the floor facing in some direction on the floor. That's the formation you're in. And they have names like those ocean waves and facing couples and stuff. The concept is kind of how the thing's going to be done. Often you won't hear a concept. Most of what I was doing in that last sequence didn't have concepts. The names of concepts are some listed there, and we'll talk about some of those, and they can be nested, which makes things even harder. Then there's naming conventions, the who gets to do it, like heads or sides. I talked about that. And I talked about couples 1 and 3, or the men and ladies, or centers and ends, leads, trailers. These are all a bunch of different ones. This talks about a subset of dancers, where you might say centers swing through, the outside just stand still for a little bit. Or sometimes it's by you name an active. Like when I said men run, the lady had to move, but she wasn't named. So it's like you have these people, but you want to name a subset to do something, and the unnamed people do something different. And finally, there's the actual call. And that's like swing through or follow the yellow brick road or sock it to me. There's all sorts of call names. There's about 6,000 different calls. And depending upon when they got invented and what period of time, like, laugh-in time or something, then that's where sock it to me came from. And there's new ones being invented all the time. I'd say this type of square dancing started in the 40s, and really a lot of calls got invented in the 60s. The basic is a unit of learning, and if I wanted to teach you how to square dance, I'd have 69 things to teach you, and I'd start with number 1, which might be circle left or right or who your corner is, and I'd work up through swing through and so forth. A lot of the basics are parameterized, like square through 3 takes us parameter 3, and you can do it, that tells you how many hands you go, or they have fractions in there, arm turn a half, arm turn 3/4, and at the lowest level, all you're doing is walking and turning and interacting with people. And I normally don't worry about that. You don't teach it as walk a little bit this way and turn like this. It's almost always taught in terms of how you relate to some other dancer. This is just a sequence from a dance I called in February that just to break down some of it. So there's one of the naming things. Wheel through's a call. Veer left, where you could veer right, so that's kind of a parameter. You all is a set of words you add at the end of anything. It's a call, but you use it as a part of speech just at the end of something, and it tells people to do something. Diamonds circulate. Well, diamond's a formation, and circulate's a type of formation you can do in the diamond. Strip the diamond's just a call. Couples twosome's a concept. Switch the wave is a call. Couples twosome, there's a concept. Quarter stable, that's a second concept, so it's nested. So while you are thinking about this, you also have to worry about that, and the order that you do them makes a difference often. And then wheel and deal's a call. Trail the deal's a call, except there's also peel the deal. So if you know how to do peel the deal, you might know how to do trail the deal without learning it as a separate new thing. Centers sachet through. Centers is telling who's active, and then sachet through is a call. Trace is one of these concepts, and it takes 2 calls as parameters. In this case, I happen to choose past the ocean and past the ocean. But if I chose something different, like past the sea or something, you can change the last word on that to either ocean or sea. One means right, kind of right-handed or left-handed. And then triple box or a single quarter tag do this call. So that's kind of identifying 2 separate formations. 12 matrix is another concept that instead of having 8 dancers, you have 12, and then you do this call swing-a-late. And then you have to pretend that you were doing the call cross-invert the column, which is really a variation of invert the column, and then it has fractions, and here you're going to pick up where you left off, even though you never started one, and continue to do it 1 more quarter, and it happens to end with a promenade home. So that's a typical sequence, and I don't know, that would take maybe a minute or something to call. So we have to talk about concepts a lot more, because they make they add the challenging part of challenge square dancing in there. Here's a bunch of them. I want to go through a lot of these. And just tell you how they change the call swing through. I picked ones. Every one of these can be applied to the call swing through, which we learned. So, first one was as couples, and as couples is pretty easy. It says that every couple, every pair of dancers standing side by side, facing in the same direction, pretend they're a single dancer and do the call. So if I say as couples swing through from this grand right-hand two-face line, two people facing north, two people facing south, and so forth. 1 and 2 pretend they're a single person. 3 and 4 pretend they're a single person. They have right hands joined. Their people have right hands joined, so they trade with each other. Same over here, and then the centers trade by the left. That's a pretty easy thing, because only half of you have to know what you're doing. The other half just get dragged along. And that's one of the first concepts people learn when you're going up through the levels. The next one, another one that was on the list, was in tandem. In tandem is just two people, one behind the other, like a tandem trailer. And that's a little clunkier to dance, but it's still just about as easy because only half of you have to know what you're doing, as long as you don't get two people who don't know what they're doing in the same tandem. Okay? Now, once removed gets a little bit tougher. Here, let's just imagine we're doing swing through here. I mean, the people happen to be spread out a little wider than usual, but here's 1 and 2 trading, and 3 and 4 trading, and then finally the new people trade who have left hands trade in the center. Okay, so that's a swing through. That's the thing we already know how to do. And here's another swing through, right? We have 5 and 6 and 7 and 8, and then these guys trade, and these guys trade, and those guys trade. But what once removed swing through says to do is, if you're this number 1 person here, ignore every other person. So dancer 5, 6, 7, and 8, they don't exist. And somehow try to trade number 1 and 2 to trade. At the same time, there's going to be these people beside you doing these confusing things, and you aren't supposed to get faked out by them. And almost any 4-person call, you can once remove in some direction and make an 8-person call. You can say, once removed, do this call. Finally, in this case, you can see, if you remember that as couples move, 1 and 5 kind of went as a couple. Here they kind of go individually, almost like ice dancers who always track each other as they're dancing around on the ice. They're always facing the same direction, but one of them is always to the north of the other. And that also has a different name called twosomes. But there's times in once removed where we could imagine having number 5, 6, 7, and 8 all turn around, and then it would be much more confusing. If 5, 6, 7, and 8 turned around, then they'd be holding left hands, so they'd have to trade. 6 and 7 would trade at the same time as 1 and 2, and 3 and 4 are trading, and then these would have right hands over here, so these people would trade and those would trade. So it'd be that'd be a neat thing to do, but it'd be more complicated. Okay, there's a whole class of what I call distorted formation figures, where you take normal parallel right-hand waves like this, and you say, instead of taking this person, this person, this person, and this person, let's make it more complicated by taking this person, the other center, the next one next to him, and that one, and pretend those 4 people with the X are in a wave, and these 4 people with the O are in a wave, and that's called a magic wave. And then you just do the call, swing through. Well, how are they going to do that? Well, as these 2 X's try to trade by they have their hand grabbed up there, and the O's do it, it really ends up turning into like a star that turns half, and the centers just trade normally. And so you develop these traffic patterns, even though they aren't necessarily taught that way. It's just whatever works out. And so magic wave makes things a lot harder. Another way to add complexity is to add extra dancers, only they aren't really there. So they're called phantoms. So you have 8 real dancers, and then you can add extra spots on the floor. So let's pretend that 8 of these 12 spots are occupied by real people, and the other ones you just say phantom, or in this case you say triple wave swing through. So everyone assumes that the phantoms are in the right place to make 3 waves of 4, and usually it's obvious which way the matrix goes. It's 3 by 4 or 1 by 8. Okay. And then you add those spots in, and you do the call swing through. About this point, you begin to wonder, where are we headed? Okay. Another type of thing you can add to make things more, remember, the goal is to make things more complicated, but these have to be simple little puzzles that can be solved in real time. So the crazy concept applied to a call, yes, Ken? Oh, you're right. I'm sorry. Like that. The crazy concept applied to a call is like what I call an English rewriting rule, or a text-type macro. It says everybody does the call on their own side. So in the case of swing through, these 4 people swing through, and these 4 people swing through. No problem. Then it says have the centers only, in this case these center 4, do a swing through. And then everyone does a swing through again, and then the center four do a swing through. So that's a crazy swing through. Well, crazy has 4 parts, so you could do a 3/4 crazy swing through. And swing through has 2 parts, right, the trade and the trade. So you could do a 3/4 crazy swing through 1.5, for example. And then on your own side, you trade, centers trade, and you trade. And then it's time for the middle, you trade, centers trade, you trade. And then it's time for the outside, you trade, centers trade, and everyone trades, and then you're done. And that'd be confusing because some people would have to arm turn twice in a row, and usually you think you alternate arms, and this, just by calling it that way, would cause you not to have to do that. Okay, well, what did we hit? We got all these. Random is worth mentioning because it's a meta concept. It's something that needs a concept as an argument, and then that concept takes a call. So you could do a random as couple. Well, that's not a good example. I didn't have a good example last time. I didn't come up with a good one for swing through. If I said something like random as couple swing through, it says take the call swing through, divide into parts. It has 2 parts. Do the first part as couples, do the second part normally. And if you had 4 parts, like a random as couples swing and mix, you swing half, centers cross run, new centers trade, so it has 3 parts. You do an as couples swing half, a normal centers cross run, and an as couples trade. So you're kind of applying the concept to every other part of the call. It's not really random. And all 8 means if you have a wave here like this, and you have another wave like that perpendicular and intersecting it, this wave can do the call, and this wave can do the call, kind of all hopefully without interfering with each other. And I have on the videotape a couple of those. Stable says to do the call normally, but don't ever change your facing direction. So if I was standing up here and had to do a stable swing through and I had the wave out there, normal swing through, I'd turn half right and half left and I'd be over here. If I had to do a stable swing through, this person here I'd kind of walk back to back with and end up here, and then now I'm really facing that way. So this person I'd go face to face with like that, and I'd end up over here. Now the cheat way to do stable would just be to memorize the wall, do the call, and then turn around as appropriate to face the wall. That kind of takes the fun out of it, and if everyone does that, then what's the point of calling it? So you just stop using it. But there's a different version called quarter stable, which says as you're doing the call, once you've turned that number of fractions, then you're stable from then on. So if I did a quarter stable swing through, I'd have to start turning. Now I'm stable for the rest of it, go like this, and then kind of weave around that person. I'd be facing somebody. And the cheap way to do quarter stable is to, as soon as you do that, memorize the wall and then keep on going. But it's harder to pick that up on the fly because you're trying to do 2 things at once. So that's a better way to catch people. And the final thing is that I've mentioned a little bit is fractions, where you can do things like you can tell someone to do a call 1.5 times, or do the first 5 or 4/5 of this call, or do 3/4 of this concept applied to this call done 1.5 or something. No big nums. There's a call called catch, and you normally catch 1, 2, or 3, 4, or 4 hands, because after you go 4 times, if you're going around a square, then your back catch 5 is the same as catch 1. So one time, just as a hack, I called a catch 22, and the response was, I don't know that call, because they didn't understand that 22 was the argument. They just thought that was that was the. And then there's people who are going along doing it, right? So they say, oh, we can optimize this, just take the remainder, and well, 1, 2, 3. Now, what would the remainder be? 24, 22 over, and then it's like, okay, well, we missed it the first time around. We'll stop here, and you got to get the other 3 people to all stop at the same time, and that worked out okay. Okay, so what if you were to learn challenge square dancing? What would you have to go through, or what are the different levels, and how do things get complicated? Well, these are the names of the levels. Mainstream square dancing is what you learn when you learn Western style square dancing in 40 weeks in the real world, or 14 weeks at MIT, or Stanford. The number of basics is 68, and the number of concepts is 0. And there's a couple of variations to these. There's square through and left square through and so forth. But really things are kept pretty simple there. Then at the plus level, you learn another 28 calls. Again, no concepts. At advanced, you learn 41 calls and you get your first concept. Advanced 1. I think that's probably as couples. Is that right? And then advanced 2, you get 39 more calls and you get 1 more concept. Tandem? Probably, yeah. Okay, and then there's challenge. And C1 through C4. And here they add the calls in pretty heavily, right? These just go right on up. But by that point, you're good at learning calls because you can hang your knowledge of this call. It's like one of those, only a little bit different. And you also know you have to learn all that stuff. I mean, compared to learning a foreign language, like this is a small number, right? But the thing that kills you is all these concepts. I mean, each of these takes a long time to internalize and get the feel of it rather than just doing it by little rules. Doing it by little rules takes too long. Ken had this great example of that when he learned a call called chain reaction, whose definition, starting from a quarter tag, the center, excuse me, as long as I'm talking about this. I won't get these guys back up. Right. Okay, so it says the people from the center of here who's facing someone out there, these guys pass through. Meanwhile, the end, well, it's left-handed. The end of these guys walk around like this. Now, these people hinge, cast a quarter by this hand. Thank you. These people hinge. Then the star in the middle, or diamond, turns a quarter. The people on the outside trade with each other. And the people who meet cast off 3/4. Well, I picked a good one, didn't I? And the other people, quote, move up like this guy turned around on his way. Go like that. Okay. Well, how long does that take? I don't know. 8 beats? You know, something like that. Music's going at 128 beats a minute, so 8 beats isn't very long. It goes real quick. And by the time you got through any part of the definition, it's like, it's all done. So learning things by these rules doesn't help. You have to learn by a rule that's going to work quick enough. Okay, so I think we're almost done with this. So there's 4 levels of challenge. And when you take all the concepts and all the different calls you can apply them to, remember there's lots more calls like swing through. There's lots more concepts like all these concepts I mentioned. The number of different combinations becomes more than you could store on a list machine. The title of this talk was Patterns and Puzzles in Challenge Square Dancing. And now that you know enough about square dancing and challenge square dancing, actually, are there any questions on anything I've talked about now? You guys could all get up here and do a couple swing through with confidence, right? Okay. So there's 2 halves to the rest of the talk. There's the patterns part, and then there's the shapes part, or the puzzles part. So the first thing that you may not have picked up by what I was saying is that all the choreography that's done has a certain amount of symmetry to it. If you look at a squared up set, all the calls, all the ways I name people, it's always heads, sides, leads, trailers, ends, centers, men, women. There's no way to distinguish one man from let's go back to this guy. There's no way in which I ever distinguish this man from that man. It's always one man. I never say one man, do something. It's always men do something or head men do something. So these people will always, there's always going to be point symmetry right around the center of the whole set there. And this guy, if he's facing north, the other one's facing south and so forth. So that symmetry is always there. There's a rare exception when you call an unsymmetric sequence, which you usually do to make things either more interesting or a little harder. I have an example of one of those on the tape. But most calls don't make you non-symmetric. And that's a good help. If you're number 3 man and you don't really know what you're doing, you can always just look over at number 1 man, get across the center of the set, turn around, and you'll be there. Of course, by that time, he's moved again. You have to run to catch up. It's a lot easier to follow the moving whole than it is to follow the opposite. If he's turned around or something, yeah. Oh, if he's following you, yeah, then you're kind of both going around like, uh-oh, now we're really in trouble. So then you should look at the square next to you because there's always a corresponding person in that square. Yeah. Yeah, right. The funniest is when they don't know that both of them don't know what's happening. They're each following the other because maybe they're real far away and they don't want to talk to each other. So that person's called your diagonal opposite. And that just means the number of right-hand ocean waves, 8 spots on the floor here, is 384. Because here I have this handful of dancers, and there's 8 people I can put in this spot. And I have to put his diagonal opposite in. That leaves me 6 people to put in this spot. He has to be facing this way because I said it's a right-hand ocean wave. And that puts his diagonal opposite, which leaves 4 people over here and 2 people here. And that's 384. And that's for right-hand ocean waves. And there's, the way to fill a 2x4 rectangle with 4 facing directions is 4 times 4 times 4 times 4. times each of the 384 different ways you can put people in there. I mean, it's just a lot of things. It's like Rubik's Cube, right? It's like, I mean, resolving is a lot like solving Rubik's Cube. You have all these little transforms, and you slowly work your way closer to a solution. And that's a lot of what just calling off the top of your head and getting the dancers to their corners like. Some of these all 8 moves where you have a wave like this and a wave like that from the top look a lot like a kaleidoscope. Or even, in fact, a lot of this stuff looks pretty neat when you view it from the top. If I were good, I'd put all these people on so they have their opposites, since I told you about that, but I'm not going to. Okay? So if they were to do a call like pass-through, right, halfway through, they kind of look like that, and then they go all the way through, and then like bend the line, they all bend like this, and there's really kind of a fourfold symmetry. You can always fold the square along this center line or that center line, and the people would end up on top of each other. And that looks neat when you view it from the top. So there's a lot of motion that has that type of symmetry to it. All 4 couples and all 8 stuff has rotation by 90 degree symmetry because I've never distinguished between the heads or the sides or anything. So all 4 men always have to be rotated by 90. You know, if you rotate by 90 degrees, you'll end up on top of another guy, and you'll see some of that. And then finally, there's this unsymmetric choreography that I mentioned. And the way to become unsymmetric is someone either invents a call that does it, or you call something like tag the line and face the caller. Instead of everyone facing right, left, in, or out, they all face the caller, and that's kind of a non-symmetric thing. And it's neat to come up with new ways to do that, or whatever. Now, restoring symmetry is a lot easier. There's a lot of calls, like if I was in a right-hand wave and told everybody to step through, they'd be in couples back-to-back. If I was in a left-hand wave and told everyone to step through, they'd again be in couples back-to-back. You could imagine one right-hand wave and one left-hand wave, no symmetry there. Tell everyone to step through, suddenly there's symmetry. So it's a lot easier to put the symmetry back than it is to get it out. But you can put it back in such a way that you can never resolve the square. I mean, you have to make sure all the people are there correctly, too. There's a lot of shapes you run across. And we've talked mainly about these rectangles. There's embedded shapes like that magic wave, or if it's a distorted box, you call it a trapezoid because it looks like a trapezoid. So here there's these 2 trapezoids, and you can do any call from a box of 4. You can have 2 of them do it. There's O's, there's X's, there's diamonds. And diamonds are interesting because they have a wave down the middle, so you can have the wave do something. And they have this box of 4 around the outside, so you could have them do something else at the same time or a different time. And closely related to them, if you have the center's arm turn a quarter, you get this hourglass type shape, and there's a circulate path around it, and there's a diamond in the middle of the hourglass that you can do things with, and there's still that box around the outside. And if you have these people slide together, and these people move apart, and these people slide together, you get a galaxy, and it has a box in the middle now, and it has a diamond around the outside as opposed to this guy. So you could have the diamond do a circulate, and the box do a, I don't know, split transfer or box transfer the column or something like that. Here's another distorted shape like trapezoid. You can also pick out these 4 people. That's called an interlock parallelogram because there's another little parallelogram inside there. There's also parallelograms like this where you just have these 2 waves, only they're shifted by, in this case, 50%, but there's some amount of offset. And you do the call and then make sure you keep the amount of offset. And there's interlock blocks where the 4 people with the X's are all trying to do a call that's done from a box of 4 and ends in a box of 4 at the same time as these 4 without killing each other because maybe while this one's going that way, that one might be going that way. And you have to remember where the spots are, and it's easy to remember by this diagonal here because the blocks either look like that or they look like that. I didn't have to go to that much. Or they look like that. I mean, so you kind of remember which corner of the room the diagonal was while you're doing the call. And if you're lucky on the videotape, you might see some of those. What else do I want to say? I think that maybe it's worth showing the videotape now. I have 3 tapes, and I'm going to show you about 2 sequences from each one. The first one is okay. This is from Square Dance Barn that's out near 495, and it's an A2 level. I think it's an A2 star tip at the end of a dance. The lighting wasn't very good, so you'll have to do the best you can there. And the thing I wanted to show you is he starts off with some circle figures, which has that rotational symmetry by 90 degrees. And you'll see various crossed waves and bars and stuff. And then he, on his next sequence, you might see a chain reaction, because I think he does one of those. And then he gets them into diamonds in an hourglass and has the diamonds circulate and flip the diamond. That gets you new diamonds, and then those diamonds do something. And so I thought that worked out pretty well. And the guy's name is Don Beck. He's one of the callers in this area. I think I will play it with the sound on. Wow. They're in diamonds. Okay, so that's that one. Now, that showed a couple of things that were good. You know, as people kept moving, usually one step to the beat of the music until Don kind of ran out of things to say or was flustered by something, and then he kind of had this long pause and everyone's kind of going like that. The next one has a, let's see what was on this guy. Yeah, okay, this has two things. One is he called a pretty complicated call. He called tunnel, counter-rotate a quarter, the pulley butt, stretched foursome, reset a half. And you'll notice the dancers kind of lost it a bit there. And but they caught up, and these people were dancing to a tape of a dance that was taped from somewhere else. So they can either stop the tape or do it. I mean, it isn't like the caller's going to wait for them. And in this case, they chose not to stop the tape, and they did manage to catch up. So at the higher levels, there's a lot of error correcting going on all the time, and it takes more than just one person being wrong to break the square down. And the other thing that was in there is this has a non-symmetric sequence. And he's going to say, relative to me with magnetism, which completely confuses everybody. But what he means is, with magnetism, if you're sitting next to someone of the same sex, you turn your back on them. If it's the opposite sex, you face them. So it's a sex-dependent call, which means the call is done differently depending upon what sex you are and maybe even the person next to you. So when he said relative to me, obviously he was a male caller, and all the guys are supposed to go this way, and the girl or guys turn their back. I didn't quite hear all that, so I think I might be on this. So so that's why I didn't do it right.
What's the level of this?
This one's a C4 dance. And we had all just driven down to New York on Long Island, and then we said there's a dance the next weekend, so that weekend, so we put on a tape of this dance, which we just gotten, because it had been called in Chicago a couple of weeks ago, and we had heard it was pretty good. So we're pretty tired and stuff. Okay, so you notice that now they're non-symmetric, right? This person's facing that way, and this end here is facing that way. So this is a left-hand two-face line. This one's a right-hand two-face line. And you can't do that normally. So now there's all sorts of neat ways that normal calls can be used that give you unexpected results.
To me with magnetism, couples hinge. Girls act as couples, boys couples twosome, and girls ripple one. They feel. The centers trade at each line, all the girls run. Sometimes two-face, everybody's swinging anchor. Opt for the second boys behind the first boys.
This action coming off over here would never happen on that. It ends up that people were leaving the ends and going the same way. They always leave the ends and go the opposite way. That's why I had to say this funny thing. And this T formation with a line of 4 and these couples facing, that also would never happen.
Yes, boys are designated sitters. Everybody signs to some dive through. Girls start. Revert vertical half tag. Slip. Work once removed and brace yourself. Run wild. You really have me worried, didn't you?
Yeah. We don't... Pardon? That was a tape we were dancing. It was a tape of a dance done in Chicago that kind of there was only a square at. But that tape gets sent around the country. Pardon?
I mean, halfway through the caller didn't sound as if he knew what he was going to say next.
All that was written out beforehand, so he should have known. He might have just, the group that was doing it live might have paused or stumbled or something, because it's probably only, I think it was only to a square as opposed to a lot. If you're calling to a big floor, like 10 squares, then you just call to the square that's doing it. Yeah, Ken? That, I think at like C4 there's about 10 squares. There's like 2 squares in Boston, a square or 2 in New York, and a square in Chicago, and 2 squares in Northern California, a square in Southern California, a square in Japan, and assorted dancers in, you know, Kansas City, New Orleans, and Canada. I want to hit the third one in just a second after I talk about this other stuff here. How are we doing? We're almost done. So what makes, the part that I think is interesting is what makes the puzzles hard, challenging, interesting, or whatever. How do you fake people out? As a caller, how do you fake people out, or how do you teach people so they don't get faked out, or they don't get faked out by you or by the other callers? Well, the first thing is that people memorize patterns rather than definitions. So you can often find a place where their pattern walking doesn't work. There's calls where 99% of the time the guys always turn right, the girls always turn left. Just put them in the other position and they'll go by and each turn out rather than in, because the rule is in, but they've memorized right, because that's all the examples they've ever seen. Doing a call from other than the usual position, the same kind of idea. Some calls have definitions which are 99% of the time done from right-hand ocean waves, but they work from lines back to back if you follow the rules. Stacking, saying something like following crisscross and spread, mix about and roll, which I took out of somebody's dance. And just having to remember all that stuff while you're coughing up the definition. You know, how many chunks of stuff can you hold in your head, and what size are the chunks that you can hold? How long have you been dancing that you've got this? If following crisscross and spread is pretty complicated and you're back going through all the little things, then you're in trouble. And I called that once as following crisscross. This got called a lot, and people kind of memorized it as a unit. And then I called it following crisscross and spread, about, and mix and roll. And I switched 2 words around. Everyone kind of goes, that didn't sound quite like the usual one. And suddenly this thing of how it flowed through just didn't work anymore, so that would fake them out. Concepts are a big way to make things harder. Incredibly harder. I mean, hard enough that you take, if you nest 2 of the right concepts together, you can stop even the best floor in the country from being able to do things. They'll just have to really take a long time and think. And you still want to keep dancing in there. So like some of this stuff wasn't really dancing. They were stopping the guy to say a lot of words. They moved a little bit, like that time when the people traded over there. That kind of wasn't necessarily good. Yeah, Kent?
In your last version of this talk, it probably wasn't appropriate, but I guess it's worth mentioning that there's a lot of analogy here between concepts and flavors as mixins, and that often the inheritance behavior is not completely well defined. When you get these two things that are pretty well formed, and you pull them together, and all the interactions may not be something that you thought about in advance or that you have a lot of practice with. So your intuition is right there. I really feel like it's a lot of that same sort of mix and match. Hope it works.
Phantoms make things harder, especially greatly distorted long ones like a 1/12. It's hard to keep track of where the holes are, or 1/16. The biggest amount of phantoms that I've heard called is a lady called a 56 matrix, blah, 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 and everyone just threw up their hands and said, you've got to be kidding, you're nuts. So if you make it too hard like that, then people just can't do it, and what's the point if no one can do it? Relying on others for information, like on that with magnetism call. If the person next to me made a mistake and is really the wrong person, I'm going to go wrong after I do with magnetism if they happen to get switched with a girl. Or if the way I do this call depends upon that person over there's facing direction, then I'm in trouble unless they're accurate. Normally you can kind of do your part of a lot of stuff, which I actually think makes, if you could follow the shape of the formation in your head and follow the rules, you're almost always holding on or turning somebody. If you were blind, I would think you would be able to be an excellent, not only square dancer, because there are good people who are blind who are good square dancers, but a good challenge square dancer, and I've never met someone who does that. I do know people who are blind who square dance, and they don't do calls by following the rules and having a mental model in their head of what the shapes look like. Instead, if the call is something like scoot back, they'll walk forward because they always start walking forward. And if you hit somebody, oh, I must have been facing in, so I'll do the in-facing part. And if you time out when you're walking out and you go, well, no one's there, I must have to turn around and walk back in. And that's the wrong way to learn things because you wouldn't be a good challenge dancer that way. Yeah, Steve.
At Stanford, there's a very good blind C1 dancer.
Yeah, good. Okay, amount of time allowed. I mean, you saw Ben on that tape. He was the guy calling, stopped, waited, so forth. If there had been 5 squares there, and just because this square can't do it and this guy's doing it, as long as you call, allowing 1 beat for every step and all that kind of stuff, you don't have time to think very much. Yeah.
Timing there.
Well,
the caller completes the call, and then is it like?
I've often thought about making like a voice, Henry's voice thing, speak the stuff. Okay, and I think the way I would try to do it is I would make sure that the new words that you had to say just finished coming out right as the people were hitting the end of the call. You can often anticipate just a little bit. I mean, you shouldn't do it because there's calls that fake you out.
Don't get any.
The thinking, now you don't want to stop and then think for a beat and then go again. I mean, that would be bad, especially on Don's tape. I mean, those people were just kept right on moving. And so you have to think while the end of the last call is happening. And you have to say all the words. And that means if I call touch a quarter, which takes 2 beats, then I want to say split phantom column, magic column, transfer the column. Okay, well, I'm in trouble. I have to either pre-cue the whole thing, and then people will get upset because I'm saying too many words all at once. So you just don't call things like that. Or they all have to stop and wait. I mentioned fractions.
You call so that the entire call is beforehand and all of this regards.
And then the person has in mind the beat at which this previous call is going to stop, so they know they cue that information after, so they know the beat.
Well, they're still just going along, finishing the call. They know, yeah, at the end I let go of this person, walk around like this.
I want to emphasize the beat is like when they're really dancing at full speed, they're like spot on.
I think so. One thing I should do is I want to put on Don's tape for the mainstream dance. I'll just rewind it a little bit and play it at fast forward. And when you play something at fast forward, you can really notice the pauses. And it looks more like, at a carnival or something, the thing with the teacups, and the teacups are all spinning around, and those things are on arms that are spinning. Well, the people it reminds me of that, because there's all this action going in and out, but it's all continuous, constant speed action. And every once in a while, you'll see these guys stop, and the centers do something, and then they all do it. And then if the caller makes a mistake or runs out of things to say or watches a square and waits for it, you'll see the whole floor kind of stop and then go again. And I think that comes out pretty good. Challenge dancing doesn't look like that, sped up.
It's often not because they're following the beat so much as that the sheer fact that every motor action that you take takes about the same amount of time for people all being the same height and the same amount of energy or whatever. And they're all interacting with people, so they're all getting slowed down. If they're going a little faster, the chances are if they're having to turn with somebody else, that'll slow them down. So that keeps everybody pre-regulated to the same speed. And there's a bit of peaceful optimization that happens at the end, in between every call, where because you've heard the next call and you know that you're going to have to turn, you sort of take advantage of your knowledge about the way the next call starts, and it allows you to sort of curve into the next call much better.
But that's also the mark of a really good caller, is someone who can keep you going the way you already were going at the end of every call.
Do you want to make sure every call flows into the next one and has the proper use of hands and it doesn't have too much flow and all that? I'm calling on the third tape. I'm not as good as like these other two guys. You'll notice it'd be a lot more jerky is my guess. Also, I think I was calling harder stuff, and the group was tired at that time when I was filming them, and so they weren't doing quite as well.
I guess I'll say, like, do you have fun? Do you end up having fun if, see, from just watching the film, obviously that was a hard call, right? But it's like, it seemed to me like the music was like not really that important.
I agree.
More or less getting the position of the
I think it's,
guy.
yeah, that's right. The
It's
higher
like
up you go.
Like if you played the music and you played the call, when you got to a specific beat in the music, would it always be the would they always be in exactly the same position?
For harder stuff, I don't think so. I mean, there's these tables that say swing through takes, I forget, 8 beats or something like that, or 6 beats or something. Usually a lot of them are powers of 2. And that's because the music is recorded with 4 and 8 and 16 and 32 beat phrases. And there are, at lower levels, people actually can fit the calls to the phrase of the music, and that makes the dancing feel a little better, although it's hard to do. At this stuff, the guy just says it, everybody does it, and then when they get close to the end, he sees it visually and then says the next call. And if I call, here's the question, if I called the same sequence twice to 2 groups of dancers, and neither one made a mistake, would I use up the same number of beats in music? And I bet that I certainly wouldn't. At a low enough level, I think you would all the time, but
People seem to like it's like a pipeline, right? You're taking error traps.
Yeah, right.
Really seeing.
Yeah, yeah.
Helper again until they sort of felt comfortable that they were walking it through and taking it at the right speed and being able to enjoy it. They're divided into, you didn't talk about hash calls.
No.
And versus sync calls. Want to say anything about that?
Go ahead.
You can really only, in my experience, you can really only keep dancing up to about the middle of C2. And after that, it becomes
Like
less
a
like
human
dancing.
Rubik's Cube. It's like a human Rubik's Cube.
I'm not sure.
Well,
it becomes a little more, it starts to sort of fade into puzzle solving somewhere.
I guess that I think that there's material that can be written. I've been hired to call danceable danceable C4 dances. In other words, write as hard as you can such that it's danceable, such that you can deliver it, such that everyone keeps walking and so forth, as long as they can solve the puzzles. And that means never put so many words in. Like I couldn't write a sequence like what Ben called the non-symmetric one. Now people tolerate that for the non-symmetric thing because it's worth it a little bit just to get that interesting non-symmetry. But I think that there are, maybe the tape I have of me might have 1 or 2 things there that looks a little more.
Obviously, do you ever thought of could you teach a robot or 8 robots to square dance?
Have you ever seen the, I think it's the React track. It's this little tank that can remember like 32 commands or something. You say, forward 5, and it rolls. It was by Mattel. Well, we taught that to do a grand square. but other than that, I don't think so, because I can't teach a computer. I can't type in the average caller's material to a computer and have it move people on the screen, be it smoothly moving them so it really knows how they interact, or even jump from place to place to place. I can't do for the average caller just type in his material and it can do it, because the English is too. The English and the definitions, it just has too much human stuff in it currently for the way I can do computer stuff. I don't know. Let me get through this, and then we can have more questions. There's only about 2 more slides. Bad calling makes things hard. That sounds funny, but there are people out there who don't deliver their things well, who say too many things, who pause in the wrong place. Is it stretch, diamond, comma, circulate, or is it stretch, comma, diamond, circulate? And how do you call that, and so forth? And people who mess that up, like me sometimes, make it harder on the dancers. Well, this is a folk art. What are the rules? There aren't any official rules. There's no global organization that says this is the way it's done, and so forth. Things are always changing. Dancing isn't the same as when I started in 1974. It's changed a lot. It's going to keep changing. It's evolving. We don't know where it's going to end up. It seems to get harder and harder. More and more calls get piled on. The lists get longer. The dancers get fewer. I don't know, how we're going to make it so new people can keep learning. Cheaters always lose. If you're doing calls incorrectly, there's always usually a way the caller can trick you. I talked about the English rewriting rules. That's just kind of a cheap way. Another one is in reverse order. Take the parts of the call and play them back in the opposite order. So if the call says do this, 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 do the third thing first, the next thing next, and then the first thing. And it might be a really odd position to start in just to make it all that doable, but that's what you do. That makes things hard. Your mind is not organized to take things, this definition you can play this way and then do it that way. There's disagreements over the internal representations of a call. I've had disagreements with people on the parts of a call like square through. No one agrees in the definition. All these concepts let you pick on different parts of calls, and if you pick on the wrong call and everyone has their own internal model and it isn't the same, even though they can do the call normally, then you have a problem. Some calls get extended, like there's a call invented called Ferris wheel that went a certain way. And people said, oh, well, you can do, that's just a Ferris wheel and deal. We could do a Ferris turn and deal, a Ferris swing through, a Ferris, and they got more and more and more calls. Sex-dependent calls make things more complicated because you have a little bit more rule to remember. There's always this disagreement about what is right versus everyone got through it. If I call something technically incorrect and the whole floor does it, why isn't that right? Well, if they do that, then that means I can say this, and this means that, and that thing there, and you certainly wouldn't agree with that. And they say, no, I don't want that. But so you have these problems of what is technically correct. Often what's technically correct is harder to dance and harder to teach. A precise rule is hard to dance and teach, but that's what some people want. And some callers prefer to go for the whatever I can get the floor through, right or wrong. Callers often can't dance. That's because they are thinking a different process. They want to think of what calls can I do from where I have the dancers now that are legal and flow well. And then they just call it, and they want to know about how long it takes and what it looks like toward the end. Dancers have to stand there in some formation that they know, hear a call, and then start executing it from there. And those are two completely different things. And if callers don't dance or dancers don't call, then each half only learns one half of it. And there aren't that many dancers who are also callers, because often once you get into calling, you don't have time to be a dancer. That's just an interesting thing. This right loop -1 in roll is just another example of a little, this is kind of a gimmick, but I thought it was neat. The call called right loop 1, I'm standing here. If I'm told to right loop 1 and there's a person next to me or a spot next to me, I walk in an arc 180 degrees around one spot. So I'd go over here. Fine. If I were told to right loop 2, I'd walk in an arc around the two spots next to me. Right loop 3, so forth. If I'm told to right loop 0, what do I do? Okay, there's a good answer. Nothing. Run into the next spot, right? Yeah.
Did you face around that way?
Yeah, and face around that way. So if I right loop 0, I'm going to go here, because I walked in an arc to the right around 0 spots. Well, a lot of people think right loop 0 either means do nothing because they hear the word 0 and 0 means nothing, so I can't move, or they turn around like this because they think, oh, that's just a U-turn back, but it isn't, because right loop -1 is the U-turn back, because now I'm going to walk forward in an arc this way around -1 spots, which I think would have me turn around. And what I have on there? Well, if I had right loop -2 and roll, if you follow all this out and really believe it, I would walk forward like that, end here, and then turn a quarter more the way I was turning just to make sure I turned the right direction. And those are some puzzles you can invent and try on people, and a lot of them don't like them and don't buy it. But it's worth it once. It's a gimmick rather than something you use all the time.
The -1?
Pardon?
You put a function in there for the -1.
The 6-couple dancing, all the rules you have for a lot of calls that work with 8 people also work with 12 people. And sometimes if you have an odd number of people or couples at the dance, or just to try it, you can get six couples in a square and do neat things. And a lot of the fact that all the rules you've known just kind of instantly extend, and without teaching the dancers anything new, all the stuff they've ever done kind of works, is just really amazing. And it isn't as precise as it sounds, because I don't think I could make a computer that would extend all these 8-person call definitions to 12-person call definitions. And there's some neat things you can do just when you're calling. If you have 2 guys calling, sharing the mic, like you can alternate calls. Well, that's even harder. People who sight call, they often have a little pattern in their head that they're going through. And if you alternate calls, like I say head square through, and then the next guy goes swing through, well, I don't know what he's going to call, so I have to instantly remember where it goes. Hopefully I'm a good dancer, and then come up with something else neat to do from there. And often people will modify the tail ends of it, so I'll go swing through, and he'll go once and a half, and then it's back to me. Well, now I've got to do, a split circulate, and he'll go once and a half, and now I'm in diamonds, and I'll go flip the diamond, and he'll go flip the line, and I'll go, geez, well, that was neat that he came up with putting the two words flip the in sequence. And then when you want to get back to your corner, it's like solving Rubik's Cube again, only each time I do a twist and give it to Scott, and he does a twist and gives it to me. And I'm thinking, gee, he's not doing the same transform I'm doing. I wonder, I'll just go like this and mess it up and give it to him. And then this guy will give me a dirty look and go, no, 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 you want to go like that. So that's a lot of fun. If you get guys who are good at that, it's really pretty enjoyable. I have one last slide. I mentioned that the people in Japan dance. They actually come over to the conventions and stuff. Every couple of years you'll see the same people. And they have a note service which describes calls. This one happens to have most of the description in English. This is one of the more complicated calls called a revolving teacup chain. And this guy just does all this calligraphy and draws all the arrows and everything about how all the people are supposed to go and so forth. So I thought that would be amusing. And they're really good dancers there. They teach in Japanese, but the calls are still in English. Let me show the last tape. So this is me calling, and it's a group of dancers in this area. As I said, they were a little tired. Now, this is going to be an example of people making mistakes, correcting them, trying to figure out what's happening. I mean, not all of it's good dancing or good calling because it's a lot of stop and go, but it has a lot of hard puzzles. And one of the puzzles to watch for, which faked people out a lot, was I say old stretch, single cross concentric, single shakedown. Here, if you don't mind. Well, I don't care about these people. So if I have a call, if you have people back to back like this, you can say shakedown. All the action heads to the right. People kind of go around. They quarter right, turn the box 90 degrees, and quarter right. So that's a shakedown. Now, single shakedown is the two-person version of it. If you have two people back to back, they just kind of turn around and end up facing. So they've turned 90 degrees, right? They've quartered right, cast a quarter, and faced each other. Now, if I have a column of 4 like this, I can have these people do the call, and these people around the outside do the call, and that would be called single concentric. So I could say single concentric, single shakedown. If I had these people do the call and move to the outside, and these people move in the middle and do the call, that'd be cross concentric, because instead of having these two concentric circles, they're working the circles cross. So part of what I just said was that they're going to do a single cross concentric, single shakedown. So these people are going to do the shakedown and back out. These people are going to smoothly come in the middle and do the shakedown. Well, that ends there. If we have another group of people on the other side doing the same thing and it ends like this old stretch thing, which should just be called stretch, but there were 2 of them invented, and this one tells them which one kind of, says for the people in the middle who end in the middle to end on the far side of the center pairwise. So they start from, I don't know, we'll see on the tape, and they should end up like this, but it takes them a while to catch on. Okay?
So let's do a hard one. Side, pass in, push off. Grand quarter mix and left pop. Trail chain through. Cascade, 2/3 recycle. In roll to a wave, flip back and scatter. Zig roll, circulate. Ignore the side women, here comes the judge and roll. Quick turn and deal. Magic column circulate. Go 1.5. Grand erase. Chain reaction. Tony, go first class. Hold stretch, 2/3 cycle of left half tag. Reverse the pass. Cross roll to an ocean wave. Right and left grand. Missing the cross roll and bad flow for one person. One person. What? That part?
So something I just noticed watching this, they talk a lot in the square, right? They're having fun, they're talking to each other and making comments to me. You don't notice that quite as much at a dance, but if it's just this one square there. And they're a lot more vocal about what they're doing or thinking and stuff. The other thing was that my calling wasn't great there. You saw them go. I didn't give the call when they were ready for it. I was kind of being a little slow on that.
August 84. Sides curly wheel. Double pass through. Hold stretch, single cross concentric, single shakedown. Sides latch on the top.
These guys aren't moving.
ABC through to the sides of the leads, presumably so the leads latch on or something, right?
Read my lips.
Scatter skew reaction. Cover up. Swing through. Single scoot and trace. Stack the wheel and line. Flip the top and line. Once removed, reverse single polywally, explosion. Explosion. Cross, flip back. And you bow the partners, cortisol, stay put.
No, but I have the advantage of knowing what the next call is, and I can know where that's done from a lot easier than I can where they're going to end. I mean, some of the calls I can do in my head. A lot of them just aren't that hard just to visualize. And it's a lot easier when you're looking outside of the square, looking in, than it is when you're in the middle, especially if you're short and you can't see through this guy who's tall or whatever.
Usually up on platforms, right, where you can look down.
Oh, I know what I want to do that. Sometimes you are. It's neat to call from a stage or something. And that was in my basement. I don't have a platform there. The ceiling's not that high, so I'd get in trouble. Let me just try a fast-forward version of somewhere from the middle of this dance here, which just to see what the flow looks like, even though Neil left. Okay, that's the end of the tip. Now this is a singing call. This is what Kent mentioned. Singing, at a lower level, you do a hash tip, which has this off the top of your head extemporaneous choreography. And then after that, you do a singing call, which has a record that has 7 groups of 64 beats. And you do a circle figure for the first 64, and you do something with the head starting it for the second and third that rotates the girls by 90 degrees each time. Then you do a middle circle figure, and then 2 more things to the sides, and then you're all done. So it's a very patterned dance, and it also usually has calls written for it, and you often use the calls of the way the guy who wrote the singing call did it. So here's another one. So you can see that, I mean, there are some pauses, but but usually if he's calling well and he does a good job, then everyone's always moving around and stuff. Also, one thing reason I was taping this dance is I was interested in watching why people make mistakes and who makes mistakes and how they recover from them and stuff like that. So that's the stuff I was really looking for. There's another singing call, presumably. And I guess I want that guy. Okay? So, I don't know. Any questions or other comments? Or no? Yeah.
I noticed in your basement you had some tiles in the floor that were sort of like
Yeah.
templates.
When I had the floor done, I had the tiles put in like that. It makes it a lot easier to do the calls that require a 16 matrix of some sort. Unfortunately, they should be 27 inches apart, and these are 12-inch tiles. In the old days, they had 9-inch tiles. That would have been perfect. But in the old days, I had a shuffleboard court in my basement, so that wasn't the right thing either. Oh, I know. I forgot to say how all this ties into symbolics. Well, I have a program on a Symbolics 3600 that helps me write my choreography. It can do one level of concept followed by any call for almost all the concepts and virtually all the calls. It's something I've been working on for a couple of years, and all the material I call is written on the computer. The material that I can write on the computer is a small subset of what's actually used. If I take a different caller, my program can probably do between 1 and 10% of his material. If he were to try to write on my computer, he wouldn't be that frustrated in general, because there's a lot of things he does that there's a different way to call it, or you could make the computer do it. What I've done is that the computer builds up this large database. It completely expands out every call from every position, which is expensive. I mean, that takes overnight to run on a machine with a lot of memory, and you need a large address space. But I can take that data. I can take a subset of that database and dump it out for an IBM PC using DBase 3. And there's a program that we have that a couple of people are trying right now that let them use an IBM PC, usually an AT, because you need that much speed. And DBase 3 is good enough as a database language that it can show you where the checkers are and all the calls the computer knows how to do from there. And you either pick something off the menu or you type it in, and then you do it again and again. Yeah.
Charles was saying, at least the way I think about all this, that there's two different representations that people could be using. Some of the calls are defined in terms of conceptual positions, like you're in a diamond, and that a diamond is like, you think of a diamond with 4 points, and you would always move to the footsteps of another part of that diamond when you were taking the call. Other calls are in terms of X and Y coordinate kind of things to say, well, I'm going to move forward 1 unit regardless of where that leads me. And depending on whether the abstract figures have shifted so that the square is like very large or very small, the relation between the conceptual positioning and the XY positionings may be different either across different dances or even within the same dance. And so you may not be able to compare two different figures. Like you might get in a situation where you have a certain figure and you ask some people to change their orientation, holding the other people constant. So if those people got there, if one of the people got there via some conceptual movement and the other people got there via some mechanical movement, they may not, even though it looks like they're in a certain configuration, they may not be happy with actually moving in that configuration. And you kind of have to have always annotated in your mind, yes, they're in diamonds, but do they believe they're in diamonds, or do they know enough about those diamonds to be sure that these people are the centers and these people are the ends, because they're these different components, and you kind of have to know how you got there in order to know all the information. So in terms of Clark's program, I expect that has some impact on things. Do you have representations?
Well, my program only has a state transition thing. It says if you're standing on these 8, 12, whatever spots on the floor, and the call is exactly string equal to this text string, then jump everybody who knows how they get there from there to here. And if there's slight dancer adjustments or stuff, I have those in as special fudges. I have special calls that I call that really aren't calls, that mean these people slide together, because as dancers they might not know if they're here or there, and I can, as a caller, play it either way. The computer has no idea of what the official definition of a call is. It doesn't know that swing through has fractions. Swing through 1 1/2 is a separate call to it. So anyhow, it dances. I guess that this wasn't necessarily intended to be a plug, but if anybody wants to learn how to do square dancing or challenge square dancing, talk to me or Ken or somebody like that. And if there's no more questions, then you can all leave. Thank you.